Everyone knows that Texas high school football is king. But as big as the state championships may be, perhaps the biggest day of the Texas high school football calendar comes every other February. Let us explain. Dave Campbell's Texas Football presents How Texas High School Football Works, UIL Realignment. Let's start with the basics. The UIL is the University Interscholastic League, the governing body for extracurricular activities in Texas public schools, including Texas high school football. And they have a big job. There are 1,253 Texas high school football teams in the UIL, and they come in all shapes and sizes. The largest school in Texas is Allen, with 7,102 students. The smallest school in Texas with a football team is Del City, with 14 students. In other words, the largest school is 507 times bigger than the smallest school. These schools are also spread out. The distance between the westernmost school, Anthony, and the easternmost school, Burkeville, is 764 miles. That's farther than the distance between New York City and Atlanta, Georgia. So how do you make Texas high school football work with all these variables? We told you the UIL has a big job. Every 2 years, the UIL redraws the districts in which Texas high school football teams play. We call this realignment. It starts in October on Snapshot Day. That's the day that every school turns in their enrollment number, how many students attend their school, to the UIL. The UIL gathers this data, and then it's time to divide the schools for the first time into 6 roughly even classifications. For example, if your school has fewer than 105 students, your school is placed in Class 1A. If your school has more than 105 students, but fewer than 249 students, your school is placed in Class 2A. This goes on and on all the way up to Class 6A, which is comprised of schools with more than 2,225 students. So now we have the schools separated into 6 relatively even classifications, but there's another important step before we really get going. In Class 5A, 4A, 3A, 2A, and 1A, the UIL splits those classifications in half into 2 divisions. They're called Division 1 for the bigger schools and Division 2 for the smaller schools. So let's take Class 3A as an example. Class 3A is comprised of schools with an enrollment between 544 students and 250 students. There are 204 of these schools. The midpoint here is 360. There are 102 schools with an enrollment between 544 and 360. Those 102 schools will be 3A Division 1. There are 102 schools with an enrollment between 359 and 250. Those 102 schools will be 3A Division 2. Okay, so we've now divided the schools into classifications and divisions. Here comes the fun part. It's time to divide these teams up into districts based on where you are in the state. Think of it like this. The goal is to play teams of comparable size that are closest to you. There are 32 districts in each classification. Districts 1 through 32 in Class 6A, and districts 1 through 16 in each division of Class 5A, 4A, 3A, 2A, and 1A. Those districts also fall into 4 regions. Region 1 is the first quarter of the districts, Region 2 is the second quarter of the districts, and so on. Generally speaking, the districts start out west and snake their way through Texas clockwise. District 1 is usually as far west as possible, like El Paso, then through West Texas and the Panhandle into North Texas, into Central Texas and out to East Texas, down to Southeast Texas near Houston, then over to South Texas and finishing in the Rio Grande Valley. It's not always like this, but this is a pretty good rule of thumb. As we said, this is a tough job. Texas has clusters of schools in big cities and other schools that are way out by themselves, and they all need to fit together. For example, what do you do with a team like Stephenville? The 2021 4A Division I state champions have been in a district with Waco and Dallas-Fort Worth schools for the last 2 years. But they could very easily go west to the big country this time around. And there's a million other factors to sort through, like large school districts who want to keep all their teams together and schools that ask to play in a larger classification to reduce their travel. In the end, the UIL tries to make evenly divided districts of comparable sized teams in close proximity to one another for more than 1,200 teams across the state of Texas. Did we mention that this is a tough job? When the alignments are released, we will know what Texas high school football will look like for the next 2 years. And this is huge because it tells us what the Texas high school football playoffs will look like. To win a state championship, you first have to qualify for the playoffs by beating the teams in your own district. Then, you have to battle the teams in your regions, the districts nearest to yours. And UIL Realignment is the roadmap for all 1,253 UIL Texas high school football teams. They will then know the path they must walk to win a state championship. Now you know why every 2 years, UIL Realignment is arguably the biggest day on the Texas high school football calendar. Get ready.